Selflessness is the most important attribute you can have in sports. We are in the offseason of the two major sports in the United States. Okay, the NBA Finals ended not that long ago. I don't like to think about it. The Mavericks getting swept in a gentlemanly fashion was not my favorite viewing experience of the year. NFL training camp is around the corner. So we're still kind of in this, purgatory of when all that stuff starts. And the NBA Summer League starts on Saturday, but let's be honest, like we aren't overly excited about that, okay? Like these are times filled with overreactions though. These are times filled with overreactions because people have hope and all these things that are going on. Like Anthony Richardson is going to go out for practice here in a couple weeks, and he's going to have a couple great practices. We're going to see these highlight videos on Twitter, and people are going to go absolutely insane. People are going to lose their minds and be like, oh my gosh, why are people sleeping on this guy? Even though everybody keeps saying that he's being slept on. And eventually, if enough people are mentioning this, then he's not actually being slept on. But that's beside the point. Bronny James is going to have a summer league game where he scores like 14 points and hits 3 threes, and people are going to go nuts like, oh, he's going to be great. He's the next Avery Bradley, which people who say that didn't watch Avery Bradley play. He was an awesome role player, one of the best defenders on the ball I've ever seen, but whatever. My point is, this is the time of the year that people overreact to everything that happens. In the grand scheme of things, though, like this is a weird time of the year where a lot of things that happen really don't matter that much. Like, seriously, who cares if Anthony Richardson has a couple good training camp practices? Like, it doesn't really mean anything. Like, who cares if Bronny James goes nuts in a summer league game? Like, it's not going to matter that much because many of these NBA summer league players won't make an NBA roster. And an NFL training camp, it's great. You can kind of get a gauge on who's going to be good, who's going to be bad. But let's be honest, you don't know and I don't know how good the Colts are going to be or any other team in the NFL until they start playing in real games. That brings me to the NBA free agency and trade season, this time of the year that we're in right now. Like, of all the things going on right now and of all the things that are about to begin, this is the thing that's going to have the greatest impact on next year's season for the NBA. Okay, like all season, free agency and trade stuff is going to have a bigger impact on the NBA's next season than, training camp in the NFL. Okay, like for me, this is the only thing going on that actually has, that actually matters. Okay, and that's where we're at right now. And one of the big pieces that NBA fans are waiting to see what happen this offseason is what the Atlanta Hawks were going to do with DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. And they officially traded DeJounte Murray to the Pelicans over the weekend. And I know this trade has nothing to do with the Pacers, but I realized something after this trade happened. So please just bear with me for a moment. The relationship between DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, it didn't work for several reasons. But I would argue the main reason is because they both thought that they needed the ball to be the best version of themselves. And we see this all the time in basketball. Two stars that are great scorers, unable to coexist because they both think that they deserve to have the ball more than the other guy. Just look at the Chicago Bulls. Tom and Jerry appear to have a better relationship than Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. And the root of the disdain that they have for each other is rooted in the fact that they believe that they should have the ball more than their counterpart. We see this happen in the NBA time and time again. Why? I would like to think, and for the most part do think, that many of these professional athletes know the history of whatever sport they are playing. Okay? And when I look through, the history of the NFL, when I look through the history of the NBA, selflessness is evident in every dynasty that has ever existed in sports. The Patriots went on a crazy run in the NFL. Okay, in part because Tom Brady was amazing, and also in part because Bill Belichick is the best NFL coach we've ever seen. But a large part of that success was because Tom Brady was selfless enough to give up some salary. Okay, he didn't take, like I don't believe Tom Brady was ever the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. He always took less so that Belichick could have the guys that he needed on defense to put together one of the best defenses in the NFL. Tom Brady's selflessness was what largely enabled the Patriots to put together this dynasty. Okay, the Spurs were great for so long because Tim Duncan was selfless. He was totally fine deferring to Tony Parker or Manu Ginobili or Kawhi Leonard when he showed up. Okay, the Warriors were a dynasty because Stephen Curry was selfless enough to welcome in Kevin Durant, and he didn't get butthurt about taking less shots. Okay, the Bulls won 6 championships with Michael Jordan. Not because, well, in part, obviously, because Michael Jordan was great, but they didn't start to win until Phil Jackson showed up. And if you watch, if you listen to Phil Jackson talk about the hardest part of coaching those teams, especially early, was convincing Michael Jordan to pass the basketball and to trust his teammates. And when that started to happen, the Bulls started to win titles. And then we see the flip of this. We see guys and their selfishness get in the way. Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant should have won more than 3 NBA championships together. But they were too selfish to coexist. Okay, like they both thought that they had to be the man, but let's be honest. Like, do we care? A little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, no, not really. Like the first title that those two guys won together, Kobe Bryant, wasn't very good, but people don't care because they won, right? And they still give Kobe Bryant the respect that he deserves for winning that title. But once again, they were too selfish to coexist. Kevin Durant goes to the Warriors, and he has concerns over his legacy and what other people outside of the Warriors locker room were saying about him. And because he was so concerned over that and how people saw him, he broke up what would have been one of the best dynasties ever if he had decided to stay in Golden State. Okay, he allowed his legacy and the way he was perceived to break up what would have been just one of the best dynasties we've ever seen. I think that it's clear that in order to win championships in sports, especially basketball, you have to have stars that are willing to be unselfish. Like, it is easier to win a title with Tim Duncan or Steph Curry as your best player than it is, let me think here, Joel Embiid, who has to have the ball, okay, and isn't willing to give it up to other guys. Okay, teams have to have players, specifically their stars. They have to have stars that are willing to sacrifice. I think this is something evident throughout the history of sports. And yet these players just can't seem to grasp that idea. 2 players that did, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They figured out a way to coexist, and it led to them winning a title this year. Okay, they figured out a way to not only coexist with each other, but they also figured out a way to coexist with Drew Holiday and Derek White, right? And they allowed those guys to play well, and it led to them winning a title. Like, that's the best part about having players like Jason Kidd, Magic Johnson, Steph Curry, Bill Russell, Tim Duncan, or Tyrese Haliburton be your team's best player. Every guy that I just mentioned there has an understanding that in order to be great, they may have to sacrifice scoring for the betterment of the team. Okay, like the best Jason Kidd teams were when he was with the Nets, 2002. He's, slinging passes all over the floor, allowing players like Richard Jefferson to get going. Okay, like that is how you have a great team. You have guys that are willing to sacrifice, personal stats so that other guys can play better. And when I think about the Pacers and I think about their future, having a player like Tyrese Haliburton is a huge advantage. Okay, he is the type of superstar that can mold to and fit with any other superstar that the Pacers decide to pair him with. Okay, when we look at his time in Sacramento, he's playing with a guy in De'Aaron Fox who kind of has to be on the ball to be De'Aaron Fox. And so Haliburton was like, that's cool. I can play off the ball and I'll shoot 40% on catch and shoot threes. And I'll be effective in this manner. And when Fox goes to the bench, I'll play point guard and I'll do all the cool passing stuff that I'm capable of. Okay, that is one of the best parts of having Tyrese Haliburton. He can mold to and fit with any superstar the Pacers try to pair him with. And that's important, not just because the Pacers just brought in Pascal Siakam, but it's also important because when Pascal Siakam's contract ends in 4 years, he's going to be 34. And there's no team option at the end of it, and there's no player option at the end of it. that means that there's a decent chance that once these 4 years are up, the Pacers move on. And that's totally fine. That makes sense to me because, at the age of 34 is kind of when players start to go downhill. So during these 4 years, though, Haliburton's ability to be unselfish will continue to not only help Pascal Siakam, but it will also continue to help the role players that the Pacers sign. Okay, and I'm about to talk about Obi Toppin here in a second, but Obi Toppin had his best year of his career this year with the Pacers, and I think a large part of that is because of Tyrese Haliburton. I view Tyrese Haliburton in a similar fashion to Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. Role players play better with these guys, not only because they're great offensive talents, but because they're both very unselfish passers. I think that's part of why the Pacers shot the ball so well from three this year. They have a lead guard. They have a superstar. The best player on the team is a willing passer. And we've heard GMs say this. We've heard coaches say this. People say this on TV. When your best player sets an example of, I'm going to work hard or I'm going to be unselfish and pass the ball, everyone else tends to fall in line. And that is, I think, what we saw happen with the Pacers this year. They saw how unselfish their best offensive player was, and everyone else fell in line, right? And that's why they shot the ball so well from three. That's why they had the second best offense in the NBA this year, right? And so, we saw this consistent pattern of Tyrese Haliburton finding open teammates and, finding open teammates and being willing to pass on scoring opportunities to get other guys involved. And not only in the half court, but he was doing the exact same thing in the open court. He was more than willing to throw lobs to Obi Toppin, who agreed to a 4-year, $60 million deal over the weekend. And, that's awesome. That's great for Obi Toppin. His first campaign here in Indianapolis was great. It was the best year of his career. He averaged 10 points, 4 rebounds, shot 57% from the field, 40% from three. Okay, all those marks were career highs. He's the first player in the history of the NBA to shoot at least 70% on two-pointers and 40% on three-pointers. He had an awesome year for the Pacers. Okay, he contributed in the playoffs as well, which is why the Pacers re-signed him. Part of why he played so well, though, was because he played with Tyrese Haliburton, who consistently found him in open spots where he could score. If you're a role player, come to Indy. You're going to play with a guy in Tyrese Haliburton who's going to make you better, right? And this concept applies to several players on the Pacers roster this year, and it's why Tyrese Haliburton is one of the most valuable, not one of the best, one of the most valuable superstars in the NBA. He can mold his play style to fit with any superstar, and he helps make role players better. He does, and it's a huge advantage. The Denver Nuggets have the exact same advantage with Nikola Jokic. No matter who they bring in, they're going to be better just because they're playing with Nikola Jokic. And no matter who the Pacers bring in, they're going to be better because they're playing with Tyrese Haliburton, right? Because his unselfishness and his willingness to pass and move the ball just makes everyone on the floor so much better.